"Sign the house over, old man," he whispered across the dinner table, smiling like he'd already won the whole argument before it even started. The room went completely quiet. My daughter stared down at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. My fork froze midair, hovering above the food I no longer wanted to eat. "Why would I do that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my hands shook under the table where no one could see them. "Because you're done here, Raymond," he said, leaning back like a king sitting on a throne he never built with his own hands or sweat. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to say something, anything at all to defend her own father. She just looked away, fixing her eyes on her wineglass instead of looking at me. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where I truly stood in this house I had built. They had already decided my fate long before I ever sat down at that table that night. I felt the years fall away from me in that single moment, not because I was weak, but because I finally understood exactly how far they were willing to go to take everything from me. Welcome back to Dad's Cruel Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, because every villain in this story got exactly what they deserved. Be sure to subscribe and drop a comment. What would you have done in my place? My name is Raymond Cole. I am 61 years old. And this is the story of how my own family tried to steal the one thing I built with my bare hands. I built that lake house board by board, summer after summer, while my wife was still alive and laughing on that very porch beside me. It wasn't just property to me. It was every memory I had left of her, poured carefully into wood and stone and glass over many years. After she passed away, my daughter Claire moved in with her husband Garrett to help me manage things while I was still grieving deeply. I should have seen it coming the very first week they arrived. Garrett never once called it my house, not a single time. He called it the investment, as if memories could be priced like ordinary stock on a market. Within a year, he was already talking to contractors about renovations I never approved or even heard about beforehand. Within 2 years, he was quietly talking to realtors behind closed doors late at night. "You're getting older, Raymond," he said one night, pouring himself a drink from my own cabinet without ever asking permission first. "It makes sense for us to take this over before something happens to you suddenly." I told him no, firmly, the way a father should still be able to speak in his own home without fear. He just smiled like I hadn't said anything at all, like my words carried no more weight than the wind outside that window. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from the county recorder's office, official and cold as ice. Confirmation of a deed transfer, sitting right there in my trembling hands. My name, signed away, on a document I had never once seen or signed in my entire life. "What is this?" I demanded, slamming the paper down on the kitchen counter so hard the glasses rattled loudly. Garrett didn't even flinch, didn't even look up from his morning coffee cup. "You signed it, Raymond. Don't you remember doing it?" I remembered nothing because it simply never happened at all, not once. My own signature, perfectly copied, sat at the bottom of a contract handing my house to a shell company with Garrett's name buried 3 layers deep inside the paperwork. Claire wouldn't look me in the eyes that entire evening, not even once. "Just let it go, Dad," she whispered, barely audible over the sound of the television. "It's easier this way for everyone involved." Easier for who exactly? I wanted to scream across that table at both of them. But I said absolutely nothing at all that night. I just watched them both carefully, filing away every single word for later use. They moved me to the small guest cottage at the back of the property, calling it temporarily with straight faces. Temporarily became permanent within a single month, no discussion involved whatsoever. Garrett started hosting parties in the main house, my house, inviting business partners over, laughing under the same roof I built for my wife's final peaceful years on Earth. I watched through the small cottage window like a stranger standing on his own land, uninvited and forgotten. "He's not well," I heard Garrett tell a guest one night, his voice carrying easily across the quiet lawn. "Getting confused lately. We're handling everything for him now, poor old man." Confused. That word sat in my chest like a cold, heavy stone I simply couldn't shake loose no matter what I tried. They weren't just stealing my house anymore. They were rewriting who I was in the eyes of everyone around us, erasing me quietly from my own life one whispered lie at a time, while I sat alone in the dark watching every single move they carefully made against me. I remembered one name from years ago, Walter Higgins, my late wife's trusted estate attorney, a man who never trusted Garrett from the very first handshake they ever shared together. I drove to his office in complete secret, telling no one where I was actually going that day. "Raymond," he said, studying the forged deed carefully under his old desk lamp. "This signature is close. But it's not yours at all." My heart pounded hard against my ribs as I waited. "How do you know that for certain?" He pulled out a file I didn't even know existed until that moment. "Because your wife set up a protective trust before she passed away quietly. One Garrett doesn't know about. One that makes every signature on this deed completely worthless in court." For the first time in many months, something in my chest finally loosened just slightly. Hope, quiet and sharp, began creeping back into my bones after so long spent sitting in the dark, waiting for something to change. Walter explained it slowly, like he knew I needed time to truly believe what he was telling me. My wife, fearing exactly this kind of betrayal long before it happened, had placed the lake house inside an irrevocable family trust years before her death occurred. Not in my name. Not in Claire's name either, surprisingly enough. In a trust that only I controlled as trustee, a detail buried so deep in legal paperwork that Garrett never even thought to look for it at all. "He sold a house he was never legally allowed to sell in the first place," Walter said firmly, closing the file. "Every contract he's signed since is built on sand and nothing more." For the first time in many months, I almost smiled right there sitting in that office chair. Somewhere beneath all that loss and grief I had carried, my wife had already won this war for me long before it ever truly began. I went back to the cottage and did something Garrett never once expected from me. I played weaker than I actually was inside. I let him believe he'd already won this fight completely and totally. I nodded along at dinner every single night without fail. I signed absolutely nothing they placed in front of me to sign. I said nothing that could possibly give away what I already knew about the trust. Meanwhile, Walter quietly filed an emergency injunction freezing every transaction tied to that fraudulent deed behind the scenes, away from their eyes. Garrett was already negotiating to sell the property to a developer for triple what he'd paid for it originally. He had absolutely no idea the ground beneath him had already cracked wide open completely. Every confident toast he raised at dinner was simply another nail in his own coffin, and he didn't even know it yet at all. Walter pulled bank records through formal legal discovery channels, working quietly behind the scenes for weeks. What we found there turned my stomach completely upside down. Garrett hadn't just forged one single document, he'd been quietly draining my late wife's investment accounts for nearly 2 full years straight, funneling money into a business that was already failing badly behind closed doors. Claire's name was on some of those withdrawals too, right there in black and white ink. "She knew," I said quietly, staring at her signature sitting beside his name on those documents. Walter nodded slowly, almost sadly. "She's known for a while now, Raymond." That was the exact moment I stopped feeling any guilt whatsoever about what was coming next for both of them. Every ounce of sympathy I had left for my own daughter disappeared the second I saw her handwriting sitting beside the theft itself. We planned the reveal for the same dinner table where all of this had started months before, full circle. I invited Garrett's business partners, the same ones he'd impressed so much with his lake house over the months. I invited Claire as well, knowing she needed to witness this. I invited Walter, carrying a folder thick enough to end a marriage and a business deal in the same single breath. Garrett poured champagne for everyone present, celebrating the developer deal he thought was closing that very week ahead. To new beginnings, he toasted proudly, raising his glass high in my own house, surrounded by people who had no idea they were standing in the middle of his own complete and total downfall, waiting to happen right in front of them. "Before we toast," I said, standing slowly from my chair at the head of the table, "someone should explain whose house this actually is." Walter slid the trust documents across the table without saying a word. Garrett's confident smile cracked instantly right there in front of everyone. "That's impossible," he stammered, flipping through the pages with visibly shaking hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "This deed is fake," Walter said calmly and clearly for all to hear. "Every sale you've negotiated is legally void. And the money you took from Raymond's late wife's accounts? That's fraud, documented, filed, and already sitting with the district attorney's office right now." The developer across the table set down his glass and stood up without saying a single word. Claire finally looked at me directly for the first time all night. Dad, I save it, I said firmly. I heard enough silence from you already, 4 years. Within weeks, the fraud charges became public knowledge across the entire community we lived in. Garrett's business partners pulled out one by one, unwilling to be publicly linked to a man under active federal investigation now. The developer deal collapsed entirely, costing Garrett penalties and legal fees he simply couldn't afford to pay back. The state froze all his assets pending the upcoming trial date set for spring. Claire filed for divorce within the month that followed, not out of any real loyalty to me, Walter told me later privately, but because she saw the prison sentence coming and wanted distance before it finally landed on him completely. Either way, I didn't care anymore about her true reasons for leaving. I had stopped needing her approval the day she chose silence over standing by her own father's side. Garrett was sentenced to 6 long years in prison for fraud and forgery combined together. The lake house returned fully to the trust, untouchable once again, exactly as my wife had always intended it to remain forever. I sat on the same porch where he once poured drinks from my own cabinet like he owned the entire place, watching the water my wife had loved so deeply her whole life. Claire called me once, months later. I let it ring out completely without answering. Some doors simply don't deserve to be reopened ever again after what happened. He called me confused once, long ago, with a cruel smile on his face. He was wrong about that, completely and utterly wrong. I was the only one in that house who ever saw anything clearly from the start. And in the end, the only thing he ever truly built was his own complete and total downfall.